This is newsprint. It's cheap, strong, flexible, and as its name implies, is perfect for printing newspapers. This stuff used to be so important to the news industry that one newspaper built entire towns just to get more of it. Before the internet, TV, and radio, newspapers were the most important form of media. They covered everything from current events to culture and sports and business. According to Paul DeRica from the Chicago History Museum, newspapers in the early 20th century could be compared to how we use the internet today.
I mean, it really was functioning in a way that in many ways is analogous to the way we use the internet, which is our one source to go to get all the information we need about any range of topics.
And newsprint made it all possible. After all, you couldn't print or sell any newspapers without paper. Access to newsprint was so important that it was a contributing factor in a conflict known as the Chicago Circulation War.
The major parties in the conflict were the paper owned by William Randolph Hearst, the Chicago American. He also had a morning paper called the Chicago Examiner as well, and the paper of record in the city, the Chicago Tribune.
So the conflict was mainly between Hearst and the owners of the Chicago Tribune, the McCormick and Patterson families. And because Hearst owned multiple newspapers across the country, he was buying more newsprint and getting a better price for it. In 1911, Robert McCormick, later known as Colonel McCormick or just the Colonel, became co-president of the Chicago Tribune, and he had an idea to eliminate Hearst's newsprint advantage.
He was willing to think daringly and to look ahead. What would the newspaper need to be successful 5 years, 10 years from now? And as it turned out, the most immediate and, in the end, the most lasting expression of that was an independent source of newsprint.
When McCormick took over the Tribune, he convinced the board to dedicate $1 million to build a paper company that would produce newsprint for the Tribune and no one else. He brought on Warren Curtis Jr., an authority on papermaking, to help lead the effort. They started with a paper mill in Thorold, Ontario.
Thorold was on the Welland Canal, only 10 miles from Niagara Falls, which meant it could rely on hydroelectric power generated by the falls. The mill itself combined the pulp making aspect with the actual generation of paper in vast amounts under one roof. That was unprecedented.
The Thorold Mill produced its first newsprint in 1913. In 1914, they produced more than 31,000 tons of it, and the timing couldn't have been better. In July of 1914, Europe was plunged into the Great War, and even though the United States hadn't entered the fighting yet, wartime headlines were selling lots of newspapers stateside.
Which meant they needed more than ever to have access to wood, pulp, and paper. And by that point, the Colonel at least knew that the Tribune had what it needed.
McCormick himself joined the National Guard in 1916 and went off to fight in Europe in 1917, where he became Colonel McCormick. By the time the war ended, the Chicago Tribune could boast that it had the highest circulation numbers in the city. But McCormick wanted to take things even further. He started amassing a fleet of ships to work for the Ontario Pulp and Transportation Company, a shipping business he created to serve his paper business.
The Tribune owned ships that would be traveling between Canada and the United States, bringing all the raw materials that were necessary for producing the paper. So this allowed the Tribune to be produced in a very efficient and cost-effective way, which also helped it in undercutting rivals.
But McCormick still wasn't done. He had his own paper mill, but he was still buying the wood to produce the paper from. He wanted his own timberlands, but the province of Ontario refused to lease to him, so he turned elsewhere.
And where could he find it? He found it in Quebec, neighboring Quebec. Remote parts of Quebec
Just before his military service, McCormick had secured a lease on 300 square miles of timberlands in Quebec, and began laying the foundation for a lumber mill and a company town called Shelter Bay, near present-day Port Cartier. After the war, he got to work developing the town and lumber mill, and expanding the timber limits. He tapped Arthur Schmoen, who he met in the military, to lead the development of the Tribune's properties in Quebec. In 1936, they began building Baie-Comeau, Quebec, another company town to support a new paper mill. But these towns were more than just business interests to McCormick. Quebec became a home away from home.
Quebec was politically much more to his liking than New Deal America. He liked Quebec because Franklin Roosevelt wasn't president there, but he admired the Quebecois for demonstrating their fidelity, and I think he just felt more comfortable there.
McCormick was so attached to Baie-Comeau that he started spending his birthdays there.
The colonel would sit in the throne-like chair, and when feeling sufficiently mellow, would address the crowd as mes enfants, or my children. There was a significant element of deference, a very hierarchical society. And that's the kind of culture the colonel felt at home in, as long as he was on top of the pyramid.
And these were no rustic outposts.
Many big city conveniences, such as hot and cold running water, central heat, an efficient sewer system, electric lights, and a well-equipped hospital. Excellent educational facilities are provided by a thoroughly modern school.
By the 1940s, McCormick and the Tribune had spent millions of dollars and countless man-hours building a textbook example of vertical integration, when a company owns the entire supply chain leading up to their final product. Tribune employees in Quebec would chop down and process trees and load them onto Tribune ships that would carry them to Tribune paper mills. Those same ships would carry newsprint to Chicago, where it would become the Chicago Tribune. They even made some movies about it, which I've been showing you for a few minutes now.
Before tomorrow's Chicago Tribune can be printed, there must be paper. And to make paper, there must be trees. Thus, actual production of tomorrow's Tribune begins in a wilderness on the north shore of the Gulf of St. Lawrence.
By the time of the Second World War, McCormick could look over his shoulder at Hearst, who was in desperate straits. The vertical integration of the Tribune really became the secret to its overwhelming success in the first half of the 20th century.
By the time McCormick died in 1955, the Tribune had millions of acres of timberland in Quebec, and some smaller lumber operations in Ontario. But as we know, a lot changed throughout the 20th century. And while newspaper companies like the Tribune embraced radio and television, actual newspapers stopped being the main way that people got their news.
And this sort of pattern just continues throughout the 20th century, where the number of daily papers decreases, the number of radio stations and television stations increase.
The Ontario Pulp and Transportation Company, which had been renamed the Quebec and Ontario Transportation Company, stopped operating in 1983. The Ontario Paper Company was renamed and sold a few times throughout the 90s and 2000s. The Thorold paper mill closed in 2017, and the Baie-Comeau mill was idled in 2020 because of COVID-19. But there are still traces of McCormick throughout Canada. In Thorold, a plaque commemorates the Ontario Paper Company's first mill. The McCormick Generating Station, which was built to supply the Baie-Comeau mill with power, still operates today. Also in Baie-Comeau is a statue of the colonel navigating the river in a canoe.
I mean, he was always looking for, dare I say, new frontiers. He laid the foundation, not only for a nationally influential Chicago Tribune, but for an empire of newspapers and magazines.
There aren't many Chicago newspapers that can boast of actually creating a community, but that's the case with the Chicago Tribune. And I think that speaks to the power of newspapers in the 20th century.
Want to learn more about Robert McCormick and the Chicago Tribune? Check out some of our sources in the description below. If you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let us know your thoughts down in the comments. As always, you can find more Great Lakes Now on YouTube and at greatlakesnow.org.